Hey y'all, this is Sharonda Pringle, therapist and transformation coach. Welcome to African American History 101, where I'm going to talk about overcoming fear and trauma. Let me start off by saying, I'm not excluding anybody, but this class is for Black and Brown people so that we can understand how we got where we are when it comes to where fear comes from and how to overcome that fear that has been passed on generationally throughout our community. Because this is a social media platform, I cannot stop anyone who wants to learn from learning, but I must just put out there that this is a journey primarily for African American, Black people, brown people. Overcoming fear is relevant to everybody, but our struggle is significantly different. I'm going to start today at the breaking point. The breaking point of when we were a rich culture along the coast, the Ivory Coast of Africa. And we were trading everything. Imagine living in the best community. Imagine having the best schools. Imagine having a stable economy. And life is good in this time now. Back then, 16th century, they were trading gold, ivory, cloth, agriculture, horses, and they were trading amongst themselves within the continent of Africa and in Europe. And they had a strong, rich economy. So when they tell us that we come from poverty, we come from a stabilized community. What does that have to do with fear? Let's continue the story. In the midst of stability came division. Before we get to the division, let's talk about what fear is. When life is good, we're not really too concerned about anything. Fear is that emotion that causes you to believe that some harm will come to you. Fear is that emotion that tells you if you touch fire, the heat tells you you're going to get burned before the burning even occurs. Fear tells you that if you jump in to water that is taller than you and you don't know how to swim, you will drown. Fear is a threat that people give you. In some cultures, I don't know about y'all, but in my age range, fear was mama telling you, I'm going to beat your butt if you do such and such and such and such. You better be in the house before the lights come on. And it invokes a fear in you that some of us never found out what happened because we were in the house by the time the lights came on. But fear is that emotion that is incurred before anything actually happens. You're afraid. Bees swarming around you, you may be afraid that you're going to get stung by the bee, and the bee has never stung you. But you still have that emotion that gives you a mental outcome of what may happen. During the 16th century, when the transatlantic slave trade occurred, before it occurred, there were those normal fears, those fears that were warnings. Not much had really went on that was, traumatizing. And we'll talk about trauma in a minute, but I want to outline fear. At some point during the trade system, the triangular trade between the Europeans and Africans, it became triangular because there became plantations in the New World. During the 16th century, primarily Portuguese started in a trade with African leaders. The leaders got together and they argued and they toiled over it until they became divided. And somebody decided that it was a good idea to trade people as commodity. It had been done in the past, but not as frequently, where they traded their women to go to your home and to be a servant, their men to go to work your land. They started trading the people in the society, in the community, for guns, for iron, for cloth, to strengthen the military. And so let's make it clear. People who generally amongst themselves and with Europeans traded gold and ivory and horses, started trading people for labor, because the plantations, starting in Brazil, in the South American area, needed laborers. After a while, the Portuguese decided that why should we trade when we can just take them off the coast? There's a place we now call the Castles in Ghana, which was a major hub for the transatlantic slave trade, where they stored our people because they were a commodity. And they knew that the people were strong. They knew that the people were fighters, were warriors, could kill people with their bare hands. And so it was necessary to break them, the breaking point. The breaking point became the dungeons. The dungeons where they would pack, let's just say it was an 8x10 room. They would pack 200 people in a room where you could barely move, with no sanitation, no place for them to use the restroom, no room for them to fight. It initially invoked a fear because they had no idea what was going to happen to them in there. All they knew is that they had been taken. It initially stirred up emotional hurt, emotional pain. women were having their menstrual cycles, and they were just going through their cycle without any sanitation, a release of urine and feces, for lack of a better word, right on top of each other. Just enough food to keep them alive. Just enough water to keep them alive. Just enough pain to break their spirit, to weaken them in their strength. And then they started raping their women. The men couldn't fight them. They had very limited food, very little water. And as all this was going on, the dungeons were beneath a church where the Portuguese held service. Now, none of this is being said to invoke anger. It's being said for us to understand the brokenness that we now incur. And as we go on in this lesson, I'll let you know how it's relevant, because it's happening right now today. I'm going to end this part with talking about the door of no return, where people's family members, their neighbors, left out of this door, never to be seen again. Left out of this door, stripped of their identity. Their names changed from Agatunde to Jones Johnson. A name change that will give them no identity, that will give their descendants no identity. And so you have a European culture that brags today on where they came from. Before DNA, all we knew is that we came from Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Brazil, Puerto Rico, the Dominican. As much as we don't like to admit it, because we're pitted against each other as brown people, they brought some of us over there to tell it me bananas, Deo, Deo. Telling the bananas, some of us picked cotton. Some of us picked wheat. But we were all brought over from the Caribbeans to South Americas, even going up through Mexico, before they got to the United States of America, working the land, what Trump like to call our black jobs. This is where fear initially came from when it comes to black and brown people who were born of strength. The breaking down of fear, being taken from our homes, being taken from our land, and for many generations before DNA, not knowing where we came from. I want you all to think about the intro to fear and its relevance today. The fear when for a few minutes they turned off TikTok because a lot of people on TikTok have managed to make a great income to stimulate their own personal economies and the economies of others around them. That pinching fear that'll allow you to bow down to your master and appreciate him when before 24 hours occurred, TikTok was back on. And some people celebrated him. And Asian TikTok owners, I don't know what they got out of it, but they glorified him before it was done, before he was ever sworn into office. I'm not talking politics, I'm just telling you about fear and the ultimate manipulations that, if you allow it, will destroy a culture. That is Fear 101, Part 1. This is a 12-week course. Throughout the week, I'm going to go through each bullet point that is on the syllabus, and I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into each bullet point to give you a better understanding. I would encourage you, if you have not already seen it, to a one-time movie that you can watch is The Woman King. And it pretty much gives you a good idea of the transatlantic slave trade and invoking fear. What I also want you to do is, I want you to get a pen and a journal and start to think about what makes you feel that way in your own life. What is it in your life right now that is pushing at your pain points? What are you currently afraid of? We're going to talk about being afraid of losing your job, so you're treating poorly and you stay. We're going to talk about how most government entities are modeled in slavery. And then we're going to talk about facing those fears. The correlation between fear and trauma. Facing fears, overcoming trauma, and changing our mindset so we can move forward. It is necessary for us to go back before we get there. It has been a pleasure. Thank you for lending me your ear. I want to apologize because I did not know that there was a 24-hour wait before I could go live on YouTube. I will post a longer video on YouTube. This one, if I have to cut it, if it's more than 10 minutes. And I will also be posting several shorts to break into what fear looks like, to talk more about the transatlantic slave trade and the fear. Do your homework. I'll talk to you guys later.